Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most absolutely fascinating historical transformations of the modern world. We're going to unpack the story that literally built America. It's this incredibly dramatic tale of contrast, taking us all the way from a few scattered, resource-strapped settlements to a dominant global superpower. So let's jump right in and set the stage.
250. I want you to completely strip away the modern United States in your mind right now. Just imagine the reality a little over 250 years ago. Back then, there was no United States of America, no White House, no president, no Washington, D.C., and definitely no American flag flying over a united nation. Instead, just 13 small British colonies clinging to the Atlantic coast. It was quite literally a completely different world.
Section 1. The unlikely superpower.
Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand here is just how completely improbable it was for these tiny, isolated colonies to become the most powerful nation on Earth. Most folks living back then could never, ever have dreamed up what was about to happen. To really grasp this unlikely rise, we got to look at colonial life in the 1700s. And let me tell you, life was incredibly tough. The massive scale and lightning speed of today, that just didn't exist. People lived in simple wooden houses. If you had to travel, you hopped on a horse. And waiting for news? Well, you might be waiting for weeks. Plus, these colonies were super isolated from one another and relied heavily on Britain, all the way across the ocean, just to survive.
But, as you might guess, tensions were brewing. The rallying cry quickly became no taxation without representation. See, the colonists felt they were getting taxed by a government an entire ocean away, without having any say in that government whatsoever. And it's really important to remember, at first, they weren't actually trying to break away. Not at all. They just wanted reform. They wanted to be heard. But events kind of spiraled. That initial desire for a voice changed the whole shebang, and that growing tension inevitably boiled over into a desperate, all-out struggle for self-determination.
Which brings us to Section 2, the fight for freedom. The pace of change here is just staggering. We go from those simmering tensions of the early 1700s straight into 1775, when the Revolutionary War actually erupts, and the reality on the ground was absolutely brutal. Ordinary farmers, they suddenly had to become soldiers. Shopkeepers were literally dropping their tools to carry muskets. Families were torn apart, entirely caught between loyalty to Britain and this crazy, radical new dream of freedom. And then bam! Just a year later, on July 4th, 1776, they formally declared themselves free with the Declaration of Independence.
But look, declaring independence on paper and actually winning it on the battlefield, totally different things. Leading the colonial forces was George Washington. Yep, the guy who'd later become America's first president. And his army was the ultimate underdog. They lacked food. They lacked basic supplies. A lot of them didn't even have proper shoes. They were going toe-to-toe with the world's premier military force without the bare necessities. Yet, they kept fighting. Why? Not because victory was guaranteed, far from it, but because freedom just seemed worth that enormous risk. Eventually, against all odds, victory did arrive, and the colonies became a brand new nation. But they were poor, the government was super weak, and survival not guaranteed at all. However, they did survive.
Section 3. Explosive growth and change.
And that survival triggered a truly breathtaking transformation. The population didn't just grow, it absolutely exploded. We're talking from a few million people in the 1700s to hundreds of millions today. As the nation pushed westward across the continent, new states joined the Union, massive cities expanded, and booming businesses emerged. Immigrants started arriving from all over the globe, specifically looking for the opportunity this new nation promised. Honestly, the sheer scale of this growth is almost hard to wrap your head around.
To really put this jaw-dropping pace of progress into perspective, just think about the contrast here. We went from horses, handwritten letters, and basic wooden structures to sprawling railroads, highways, towering skyscrapers, and world-renowned universities. We went from waiting weeks for a simple news update to the instant connection of the internet and smartphones in our pockets. From horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, airplanes, spacecraft that actually landed humans on the moon, and now artificial intelligence. American innovation just completely turned the world upside down.
Section 4. Struggles and enduring ideals.
So this brings us to what might be the central mystery of this entire explainer. How do you have that level of massive, explosive outward change while maintaining such deep internal continuity? Because despite literally everything changing around them, the wild tech, the massive population boom, the expanding borders, some things never changed at all. The Constitution remains the exact foundation of the government.
Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court, the founders' original operating system survived completely intact. Think about it. If the founders were magically teleported to today, they wouldn't have the faintest clue how a smartphone works, but they'd immediately recognize the exact structure of the government they created. Isn't that wild?
And we've got to remember, this survival wasn't a walk in the park. This nation faced tremendous existential struggles. The Civil War very nearly destroyed the whole country from the inside out. They had to navigate severe economic crises. They sacrificed deeply during world wars. And they went through massive social movements that challenged old broken systems and fought hard to expand civil rights. Every single generation faced its own defining battles.
Yet through all of those wars, those crises, and centuries of constant evolution, the nation stayed anchored by one single defining principle: the idea that government derives its power from the people. It's actually pretty remarkable when you zoom out. I mean, throughout history, huge empires have risen and fallen. Entire kingdoms have vanished, and countless governments have completely collapsed. Yet the American Republic, dreamt up way back in the 18th century, continues to exist because of this one foundational belief.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 5, The Unfinished American Experiment. You see, history isn't just some dusty thing that happened in the past, locked away in a boring textbook. It is a highly active, ongoing process that you and I are a part of right this second. More than 250 years later, modern Americans are still fiercely debating the exact same questions their founders debated. Like, what actually is freedom? It sounds like such a simple word, right? But its application in the real world is incredibly complex.
And that naturally leads us to the next massive question. What should government do? Like, how much power should it actually have? Where does its reach end? This isn't just settled history. This is an answer that is actively, sometimes messily, negotiated by every single new generation. Then, of course, we have to ask, how can liberty and security be balanced? As our world changes at warp speed, as technology advances, and as we connect instantly across the entire globe, well, this historical question becomes way more relevant and, frankly, a lot more difficult to answer than ever before. Finally, we are left with this huge question. What kind of nation should America become? Sure, that technology has changed, the cities have changed, the whole world has entirely changed, but that conversation, it continues. And as you're watching this explainer right now, you are an active participant in this endless conversation today.
That conversation began long before there was a White House, a president, or even a country called the United States. So I want to leave you with this really powerful final thought from our source material. America was born from an idea. More than 250 years later, that idea still shapes the world. As this grand, unfinished experiment enters its next 250 years, what role will you play in shaping it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.